So in this video, I wanted to touch on, is Magic Legends pay to win? And we're going to touch on a few other things about how the game runs. Should you as a player, if you're looking to get into Magic Legends, do you think that you need to go out and spend money in the cash shop? And I wanted to touch on this very early on because I've seen quite a few videos talking about the scenario from people who really haven't even played the game. They're like level 5 or level 6. They haven't even tried the player versus player yet they're talking about the game as being pay to win, because you can go to the cash shop and you can buy decks, or you can get decks and there might be a legendary, or you might get a mythic, or you might get a rare. There's, people complaining about, for example, having access to let's just say like a specific class. I fought against the class a couple of times already, and there's nothing to worry about. It really doesn't matter. The class doesn't make the player, and that class only has like 2 different abilities. Primarily talking about the Demir Assassin, it doesn't have a completely different skill line. It just basically borrows from 2 different schools, with basically their passive and their standard abilities being a little bit different, but by no means does it make it pay to win. Now, some people might not like that, because they're like, well, they're thinking that it's you don't have access to the class, or that they need it in some way, which you don't. You don't need that class in any way, shape, or form to basically go through the different classes and gather the different traits. That class doesn't have like a trait that is overperforming. In fact, none of the other classes really have any trait that you get from when you hit level 30. My character is almost level 32. There's nothing that you get that is like, oh my god, that's so OP, like it's gonna somehow imbalance the game in any way, shape, or form. It's just not true. It's the same thing in terms of decks. You can get most of decks just from playing the game normally. Like, you don't have to actually buy. You actually don't even have to buy anything. The other thing that I wanted to touch on was also about how you can level your abilities, and we're going to touch on that for those who don't understand. So typically in any MMO, as you go through, you gain more XP. In an MMO, you typically would rank up your abilities naturally with XP. In Legends, the way that it works is that basically, as you farm some of the different, like when you look at the map, basically kind of like in Guild War, like in Guild War 2, or maybe like in the Elder Scrolls Online, where there are like these different nodes that are on the map. You have these question marks or these exclamation marks that are basically quests that you've previously done, and they act like repeatable dungeons where you can farm them over and over again, either solo or with a group. And basically there's multiple ways where you can gather all of the currencies in the game, as well as farming gear, as well as farming for the cards in the game. And so basically what happens is as you do those, you start to gain X amount of cards. Like for example, I have 3 of this particular card, but I need 40 for it to go to the next level. Now you can buy packs, booster packs, and in those booster packs, they will give you roughly around, I believe it's 700 and something. I'm not sure if I have one. Let me check my inventory. So you'd get something like this, for example, grants 600 spells for this particular one. Now, you can get quite a few of these just from doing, and this I got for free. I didn't buy any of these. These you get for free just from the regular battle pass that's for free, right? So I got that one. I have not put any money at all into the game, not a single penny, right? The other thing is that you can also utilize the currency that you grind, right? The gold as well as the aether, and then you can use that to buy Zen, right? So it's another way that if you wanted to buy something that was on the cash shop and you just wanted to grind out the in-game currency, you can actually do that and trade with other players. That is completely, you're completely able to do that in a reasonable fashion. Now, with that said, in terms of leveling up your skills, so let's say you get one of these things, for example, let's go to the wallet, not the wallet. Let's go to the store. So let's say, actually no, I want to go to inventory. So let's say you were to get like one of these. Like this is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. So you get this from the battle pass, just from leveling up and doing quests. Just like in many of these type of games, as you level up, once you've hit, I'm basically at my character, my class level rank. You'll get items like this as you basically move along the tree. And this gives 700 common, it gives you 600 of the uncommon, it gives you 200 of the rare, and up to 280 mythic. This you get for free. Now, with that said, whenever you do one of these little interactions here, especially if you do, for example, like one of these, what I would refer to as little mini dungeons, you're typically going to get about, I'd say, between 150 and 200 cards, depending upon whether you go in as a rank 1 or if you change the difficulty, right? So if you click on it, you can change the difficulty here, and as you change the difficulty, you do get more. Now, of course, many of them are specific, right? You'll get spell shards. Some of them give you maybe a specific type of, for example, let me see if I can show you. Maybe some of them will give you like something that's specific. And these aren't giving specifics. These are giving all the same shards. But some of them that you will come across will give you a specific card. So let's say if you wanted to farm that particular card, you could basically click on one of these and it will tell you. It might not be in this one. It might be in another map where they have that available. But with that said, so it takes roughly about 5, maybe 8 minutes to get it done solo, right? If you do it on normal, and you're roughly going to get about 150 to about 200 cards, and that's not including gold and aether and then all the other gems that you can get. It takes you about, I would say, between 5 and 8 minutes, and you get a huge ton of resources. So I could understand if they made it really difficult for you to level your cards and it forced you to go to the cash shop, then you might be able to say that yes, it is a little more pay to win because it's so difficult to get cards to rank up, and it's very easy to just do it through the cash shop, that it would just incentivize everybody to go to the cash shop. But that's not the case. I've been able to level my I've only been playing for about 4 or 5 days now, and I haven't had an issue when it comes to grinding. If I really just wanted to sit here, play the game, grind out, that's not that problem. I can grind. You can grind out 50k, which is the cap. You can grind at 50k, no problem. I'll stream maybe for 3 hours and I'll hit the cap without an issue. Or I'll just play the game a little bit offline. I mean, when I'm not streaming and I hit the cap, I'm able to level up and do everything that I want to do. So I could not compare, like, for example, a good example of pay to win is the Elder Scrolls Online from the standpoint of player versus player interaction, because the classes that you paid for, like for example Warden and the Necromancer, deal way more damage than the other classes just by their abilities alone. And of course they have access to more healing. And then you compare, for example, something that you cannot get in the game just by playing the game, that forces you to actually buy the expansions, which is typically things like Malakath Band, which gives you 25% more damage, and it also increases the amount that your proxies deal. And proxies by far are pay to win when it comes to the Elder Scrolls Online in terms of their PvP, especially in their BGs. The person who doesn't have proxies, by comparison, is not going to deal as much damage. Then you add something like Malakath Band, which is just a ring that gives you overall 25% more damage at the expense of a little bit of crit. You can just wear heavy armor and utilize proxies, and you will be far in a better shape and more competitive from a PvP standpoint that cannot be made up for in-game in any way, shape, or form. I've talked about this extensively. So looking at the way and the model that they've created in this game, I cannot say that this game is in any way, shape, or form pay to win, especially when you compare it to many other games that are obviously pay to win, because everything that you can get that you would pay for, you can get within the game, and you can get it within a very reasonable time frame. It's not like you'd pay, and maybe you got a day or two earlier. If you wanted to waste a whole bunch of money and support the game, then go right ahead. Why not? It's the only way that the lights are gonna stay on. But in the current iteration, that is by no means the case. The last thing that I did want to touch on is where the imbalance in the player versus player interaction takes place, and I'll show you a small video as I'm talking about this, where the real issue where imbalances will take place in PvP is primarily in when you queue for PvP. The game does not take into consideration your skill level or your gear level. It just tosses you in with somebody who is in the queue. That person can be completely brand new to the game. That person can be someone who was already, somewhat well established with a lot of skills and abilities and items, etc. And so that's where your chief area is going to be. There's people that I fought against that have been very deal quite a bit of damage. Some people that I've killed very quickly or without too much of an issue. In one round, I fought that exact same person the very next round, and that person was even more difficult to kill than they were before. So from my perspective, it doesn't seem like there's that much of an imbalance until I came across one individual that I literally two-shot. And it was more than likely because the game doesn't take into consideration your complete skill level regardless of your gear score. I'm not exactly sure what their system is in terms of ranking people against one another, but ideally that will pose an issue further down the line, especially if you're someone who is grinding out and you have your abilities are much higher rank, and then you pair that person up with someone who is just checking out PvP and that person gets two-shot. That experience is not going to be enjoyable for them, which is why you should either have somewhat of a cap when it comes to PvP, and then maybe set a cap for example, like season to season. Like every season has a cap. This season the cap is 400. Next season the cap is 800. Next season the cap is 1200. And make it so that people are able to achieve that level cap within a reasonable amount of time, because overwhelmingly in this game, the vast majority of the content that you're going to consume is going to be PvE. It's very easy to get through most of the content. The questing isn't all that great. I mean, what the game is designed for is the player versus player interaction. And I've said this before, that is where Legends should focus. If they're going to go the route of just making this just a generic MMO, there's no point in playing this, because there are other MMOs that look better. Again, from the standpoint of a Diablo-esque like gameplay mixed in with what feels like Guild Wars 1, people are going to play this game over the long haul, especially because a lot of the content that is already in the game is fairly generic. Realistically speaking, most the PvE is primarily generic in this game. The quest line is minimal at best. At best, it's minimal. The graphics by no means next gen. But where the game makes up for it is in the player versus player interaction, where you can create builds, you're fighting against other opponents, and that's where that's the base of the game. The base of the game is playing a card game where you're fighting against other opponents. The difference being is that now you have the active combat where you can move and avoid spells and avoid damage, especially within the arena where there is line of sight. And that's where people will have a hard time, primarily because the game feels a little bit more like it was designed for a controller, because you can't right click and cancel spells. Maybe you can adjust by making it right click, since right click really doesn't do anything except move your camera, and maybe you can make it like middle mouse button. If that was the case, then sure, it would work much better, where you can basically put spells out, and then, for example, as you can see, I can't right click and cancel it. I have to click escape, and it's just not a natural reach, especially when you're in the middle of an active combat situation where you're fighting against someone. So that's probably the biggest area where most people have learned to play issues, and where probably the game was designed more for someone playing a controller, because this game is eventually going to make it to things like console, or maybe playing it on your phone. But realistically speaking, in terms of the pay-to-win status, I don't see it in any way, shape, or form, especially because it's not that difficult to level up. It's real easy to just go out and grind. Most people who have played MMOs, especially people who really are looking to get into PvP, we're already used to grinding. So to go out here and do a couple of dungeons, to go out and just basically do the overland event and gain a whole bunch of resources, like most people who play PvP are already used to doing that, because most of the time the PvE content is always underwhelming. I mean, you look at ESO, for example, or WoW. For the most part, that PvE content is not exactly fantastic. It's not what draws people to the game from my crowd, from people who are there for PvP, which is what this game is primarily about. Where individuals might feel a little upset is because graphically it's not that amazing, and of course there is some issue with a little bit of lag, but that's primarily related to when there are too many pets on the screen, and you're fighting with, like, for example, like you're in a group, and let's say you're in a dungeon and you've got 3 other people with you, and they've got pets, and you're actually doing the content on anything that's not normal. The mobs take a little bit longer for for you to kill them, because they have more HP, they deal more damage. So it takes quite a bit more than just the regular when you leave things on normal, right? Excuse me. So when you leave stuff on normal, the mobs are really easy. But when you just kicking it up onto hard, the HP of 481%, and I think it's too high. And so what happens is that the game has damage numbers, and those damage numbers start flashing on the screen, and a lot of your abilities, especially if you're playing like most classes, have a lot of AoE abilities. So you have all these numbers flashing on the screen, all these particle effects. And so if you don't have a really good graphic card, then you're going to experience some frame drops. For the most part, I typically am around between 80 and like 110 frames. And if I do experience any sort of lag, it's typically in those scenarios where I'm fighting in a dungeon and I'm playing the dungeon on hard and I'm playing the dungeon with other people, and then like a huge wave of like 20 plus mobs come on the screen, and a whole bunch of AoEs and dots are ticking, and that's where I might experience a little bit of frame drop. And typically it's for about 1 or 2 seconds, and then it goes away. I really can't say that the game performs that poorly, especially by comparison to games like ESO, where you have skill delay and lag and the game freezes and get disconnected from the server. I really haven't had that experience. Lately, I have had a little bit of experience where there might be some sort of server delay, but they might not be running the server on the server that's going to go live. This might just be like their testing server. We'll have to wait and see how that differs. But there's sometimes where I'll cast an ability and then I'll get a red notification at the top stating that server disconnected, and it'll have like a little bit of a timer, and then it'll go right back to normal. But hopefully that's not the case when the game actually goes live. But that has been an experience that I have experienced here and there. But overall, I will say that by far the best experience, where I believe the developers should focus on, is the 1v1 experience that comes from playing the game from the player versus player. Get that 1v1 scenario like really clean, so that there's not that many limitations in terms of this particular thing is broken, etc. from that standpoint, and then start expanding it into 2s, and then start expanding it into 3, and then potentially think about doing some open world PvP for individuals. For example, like when you go to a map, let's just say like I'm on this particular map, I can change the difficulty on this particular map and make a free-for-all map where players can come and basically go around the map and give them added bonuses for being out there, incentivize them, just like you incentivize them for PvE, where you give them a little bit more. Super incentivize them for PvP. This is because this is a PvP game, and you'll see people will enjoy it a bit more. And of course, like I said in the very beginning, just cap it. Just put an overall gear score cap that includes, for example, like let's just say if the cap is 400, then make it so that your player abilities can't be more than level 4, right? As an example. Same thing with, for example, like your gear. When you go to your gear loadout and you go to like your artifacts, you can level up your artifacts, right? Like right here, right? You can level your artifacts, and you'll have to set like a cap, because your player gets stronger as you level up. And if you just sit here and you grind your heart out, you're going to be a lot stronger than somebody else. And the easier way to do that is just basically to create a cap and then start balancing PvP moving forward. If they're just going to go the route of making this game like a generic MMO, in my opinion, I think it'll fail. And that's basically my take. Like I said, I've been playing the game for a little bit, almost level 32. I've got a lot of gear, I've got a lot of my spells, and I've had the opportunity to do quite a bit of the PvP. This is basically my perspective on whether I think Magic Legends is pay to win and the route that they should go.